This podcast provides a platform to discuss important questions and complex issues, challenge the status quo, and confront the boundaries of the establishment. I'm retired police chief Daniel Hahn. I went from being arrested at 16 to serving over 34 years in law enforcement. My goal is to keep you informed with news not being reported, voices not being heard, and the untold history of how we got here so that we can create a way forward. So welcome to this episode of A Way Forward. I have a very special guest and a Sacramento Kings legend, LaSalle Thompson. Welcome to the show. Thank you. So on this show, we always want to start out with a little bit about yourself. And I know you're from a place that's a little bit cooler than where we're at now, Cincinnati. So maybe talk a little bit about the experiences you had growing up. And eventually, I know you didn't always play basketball, and that's an interesting story that I just heard not too long ago. But talk a little bit about growing up in Cincinnati and what eventually led you to basketball.
Okay, I was born in Cincinnati, born and raised, and I up until the time I was 7 years old, we kind of lived in what were the projects in Cincinnati. The projects there weren't that bad, but we lived in the projects. Then my mother and father got divorced when I was 5, and my mother remarried when I was 7. And we moved into, a regular neighborhood, which it was just a neighborhood with a front and backyard, but I thought we moved to the country.
And we say we, how big was your family?
I had at the time, I had 2 sisters. My brother was born later.
Okay.
But I had 2 sisters, my mother, my stepfather, my grandmother lived with us too.
Okay.
And that's something my mother pointed out to me recently. We've always had family live together. The only time I haven't lived with my family is when, I first moved here because my mother followed me out here. But and then when I was playing wherever I was playing, I lived alone. But my family's always lived together. So, I grew up, and then when I went to 2nd grade in the fall, when I turned 7, I didn't realize all this till later, but that was the first year Black kids went to this elementary school, Hyde Park Elementary. I went to.
You were part of the class that integrated.
The
school.
But
you didn't really realize it at the time?
I didn't know at the time. And, my mother raised us to always judge people for themselves. So a lot of, things that happened growing up, I didn't realize until you get an adult and you think about it. But I was always, in the 2nd grade, I think there were 2 Black students in my class. But all the rest of elementary school, I was always the only Black kid in my class. And, it was just any kid growing up. I was, am I allowed to cuss on here?
Yeah.
I was a badass little kid. I was always getting in trouble, right? Just hard-headed. And
probably not short.
No, I was always real tall. I know the first time I was aware of my height, when I was in the 6th grade, I was 5'11", and I weighed 109 pounds. And I thought I was getting heavy because the first time I weighed over 100 pounds. So that's how thin I was. I was a real skinny kid. Didn't play anything. I played some baseball when I was like 10 or 11, I think. And they came to me. I actually think they kicked me out the team because I was Black. I was the only Black kid. And they came and told me one day, I couldn't play because my birthday's in June. They said my birthday came in the middle of the season. And I remember even then I thought, well, y'all knew that when y'all signed me up.
Right,
so
right.
All of a sudden I couldn't play. So I didn't play any other sports. Now I remember they had all those Little League things. They aren't like they are now, but they still had Little League stuff in them. I remember my mother told me to get the information about playing a little. I don't even know if they had Pop Warner football then. They had Little League football and baseball and basketball. My mother asked me to get the information about it. And I remember I went to our gym teacher and asked him. And what he did, this is, I don't want to say the 3rd grade, he told me, no, this isn't for you. And I didn't know what that meant. My mother knew what it meant when I told her, but I went back and told her, and she understood. I just couldn't play. I didn't know why. And so I ended up not playing basketball until, I didn't learn to play until I was in the 8th grade. Did I tell you that story?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I didn't learn to play till I was in 8th grade. And one of the things that happened, I always tell people, is because of the cops, I started playing basketball because when I was 13, I only stayed 2 blocks from what would eventually become my senior high school. Of course, then I was in junior high school. And so they were building a vocational school onto the school. Now, my high school is a very beautiful high school. It's old, like built in 1920-something. And so they had this construction site with, cranes and dump trucks and stuff. We would go over there and play, this was, after
Like
hours.
jump the fence and go play
Yeah,
kind of.
there wasn't even a fence around it.
Okay.
This is the early 70s.
Okay.
So we would just go over there and play on the equipment. And, we never could start anything. We'd be over there playing. So right next to our high school, you had the edge of the high school, and then houses started again. And there was a cop that lived in the first house next to the high school. We didn't know this at the time. So they must have told him, keep an eye on this construction site because there's kids coming over there vandalizing. We didn't know we were vandalizing. We were just over there having fun. So this guy comes over there, and I remember he was walking his dog, and he said, hey, you kids, get off that crane. Come down here. And there was 4 of us. And so, we didn't run anything. We didn't know we were doing anything wrong. He's like, what are y'all doing? We're like, we're playing on the equipment. Like, can't you see what we're doing? And he said, he's lecturing us. You guys can't be over here. It's not safe. And he said, how old are y'all? And we were like, 13. I said, I was 6'3" when I was 13.
18.
Yeah, I said 13. He said, well, hold on. How old are you? I said 13. And he said, you play basketball? I said, no. He said, why not? I said, because I don't have a basketball, because first answer I came up with. He said, okay. He said, come with me. He said, you kids can't come over here and play anymore because this is dangerous. You can get hurt. Never occurred to us. And so he walked me over to his house. He lived right next door to the school. And I remember he opened his garage door, and he had about 20 basketballs on the floor of the garage. And I was just like, wow, look at this. And he picked up a couple balls. They weren't inflated properly. Then he picked up one. He had a little air pump. He pumps air. And he said, here, now you can play basketball. And I was just like, wow, this guy just gave me, I didn't know basketballs back then. Probably only cost about $5 or $6, but it was the first time anybody ever gave me a basketball. I was like amazed. I ran home. I remember I told my mother, this guy gave me a basketball. My mother was like,
you didn't know he was a cop at this time, though.
I did know he was a cop.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
He told us he was a cop. He told us why he was over there and why, we shouldn't be over there playing. And he gave me this, and I went home and told my mother, I was like, I got this basketball. Of course, my mother's like, yeah, okay, so what? But, so I went the next day, and the way my high school was laid out, they had a parking lot, and they had some basketball hoops in the parking lot. And I went over there to play basketball. I knew nothing about basketball. And the older kids, they weren't even kids. They were young men. The other guys would go over there, and what they would do is, this is the summertime, they would get off work, and they'd go get, their 40s and drink them, and then they would play basketball. Cincinnati very humid in the summer. So when they got to be like 7, 8 o'clock, they would play basketball because it didn't get dark till 9. And so I had this basketball, and they wanted to play. They were like, no, we're going to play with your basketball. And the baskets were lined up like next to each other. There wasn't a full court. It was just all half court. But there were 4 baskets lined up. And they said, you go to that basket down there on the end. And they gave me a soda can. They said, when you can dunk this soda can, then you can play with us. Now, remember, I'm 6'3".
Right.
So they said, when you can dunk this soda can, then you can play with us. And I don't know how long it took me, a few days, a week, I don't know. But finally, I got my time in where I could dunk the can. And so I came back, and they let me play. But I still knew nothing about basketball. I just learned everything on the fly. But what I did know is, what I learned is I was taller than everybody else. So I could rebound well, I've always been good at that. And so they started letting me play. And we would always play this game called 21, which is basically you score and you get the ball. Yeah. And as long as you keep scoring, you keep the ball. If the other guy scored, you got off the court and the next guy came up. So, and that graduated in playing 3-on-3 and 4-on-4. And then that fall, when we went back to school, I was in 8th grade. I went out for the team, and the course got cut. And the coach told me, you ain't good enough. He said, you're tall, but, you need to keep playing. And actually, I found this out. Okay, go ahead. Jump in with any question.
This guy that played in the NBA for 15 years?
Yeah.
Got cut from the high school team, or from the 8th grade team.
Yeah. Junior. Wow. My junior high was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. So when I went back, and actually, so my high school coach and I are very close. So when I went back in the 9th grade to try out again, my high school coach, and remember, I'm out playing in the parking lot at the high school every day. He had heard about me for some reason. I was 6'5" in the 9th grade, 6'5", 150 pounds in the 9th grade. So he told, I didn't learn this till this summer because me and my high school coach are very close. So when I went home this summer, I stayed at his house. And he said—
This last summer?
Yeah, this August when I was there. Yeah, I just learned this in August. He said he told the junior high coach, he said I still wasn't good enough, but the guy was going to cut him. He said, no, you can't cut him. You need to keep him. He said, you need to keep him and work with him. And when I think back, I wasn't good. I was just. Right. I remember they used to tell me I couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. I was so gangly.
Well, you hadn't grown into your body.
No,
you hadn't,
no, not yet. I was just
to manage that
long,
tall body.
thin guy.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, our team, we won our first game of the season, lost every game after that. So we weren't good. We had one guy that was a good player, and he had always been playing. I knew him, played on my high school team, but we weren't good. So then when I got to the 10th grade, the team, I think they had a decent team the year before I got there. But then when they started practice in the fall, I was going to be on the JV team. And the guy who's the starting center on my high school team, he moved to Florida. And I think the coach, we only won 3 games that year. So I think the coach kind of looked at the team and said, we aren't going to be very good. So I'm going to throw this big kid out there and just let him play. So my coach threw me out there. And, we weren't very good. And
but you probably learned a lot.
I learned a lot. And so I remember the one of the best teams in Cincinnati the year. I don't know if they were the best team. There's a school called St. Xavier. And I remember we played them. They beat us. And after the game, their starting center came up to me, and he said, hey, man, you need to keep playing and keep working. You're going to be pretty good. And I remember he was shaking my hand. I looked behind me because I didn't think he was talking to me. I'm like, who? He said, I'm talking to you. You're going to be good. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah.
So you had no
idea.
You didn't have thoughts of going to the NBA at this time.
Well, I think I'm sitting good. We won 3 games. And then we had a real good point guard named Mike Jarman. He was always on me. Now, I'm going to tell you another story years later what he told me, but he was always on me. So we won 3 games, and I was like, okay. I wasn't halfway believing him, but I was like, okay. But that kind of encouraged me. And then that summer I played, there was another guy a year ahead of me, and his name is Kenny Hamlin. We called him Cornbread, right? That was his nickname. And I remember he had this old light blue Bonneville, and we used to drive all over town playing pickup games all summer. And so when we came back in the fall, we actually ended up having a pretty good team. I'm trying to think.
This is your junior year?
Yeah, my junior year.
Okay.
And we had graduated some guys, but all our starting guys was still the same. Mike Jarman was our point guard, and he was pretty good. And we had a good, solid team. And remember, we only won 3 games the year before. That year, we went 24-2, I believe. And we lost to St. X, and we lost in the state tournament.
And what was the name of your high school?
Withrow High School.
Withrow.
And the team we lost to in the state tournament was John Paxson's team. He played for the Bulls, so I knew him in high school. But
so what did your point guard say to you years later?
Oh, he told me this like 4 years ago. He said, I used to stay on you so hard because he said, I could stay on you would get mad and play harder. He said, I never messed with Cornbread because if I had got on Cornbread, he would go into a shell and stop playing. But he said, you would get mad. He said, I stayed on you so hard because you would play harder and it would make you better. You would get mad and play hard. I was like, well, I'm glad you told me that because I thought all these years, I thought you didn't like me. But,
so was it your junior year or maybe your senior year? Because obviously at some point you got good because you went to the University of Texas.
Well, after my sophomore year is because I made All-City and All-State and All-American my senior year. And then I was player of the year. So keep in mind, it's only my 4th year playing ball.
Right.
I was All-State. I made a few All-American teams, but there was some good players then. But I was player of the year in the city, and I went to the University of Texas. I chose to go there.
So how, with so many, for example, my one daughter's in college her freshman year, and one's going to be going to college next year. So with in mind that, people that are going away for the first time. So you said yourself that you've lived with family pretty much your whole life.
Yeah.
So at a young age of 18 years old or somewhere
17.
around there, you leave to one of the biggest universities in our country, that's known for sports, and it's a big-time university, well recognized. I imagine somewhat on your own. How was that transition from Cincinnati to
you make me
Austin?
Remember stuff. So when I first went to Austin, now remember I visited my senior year, and I remember the day I went down there, I left Cincinnati, and it was like it is outside today. It's about 40-some degrees, cold and rainy.
In Cincinnati?
Yeah, in Cincinnati. I got off the plane in Austin, and it was like 80 degrees as a football weekend. And football is king in Texas.
They probably brought you on that weekend on purpose.
Well, every weekend there's a football game, but probably. So when I got off the plane, you know, it was hot already. It's like 80-something degrees. I was like, oh, man, this is great. And the way University of Texas recruited then, they didn't have any super special thing. They just, you know, put me with the guys on the team. And they had one guy played in the NBA named Johnny Moore. He was a senior then. They just put me with the guys on the team, and I just hung out with them all weekend. And we went to, remember, I'm only 17. We went to college parties. At that time, the drinking age was 18. We went to college parties and hung out. I was like, oh, man, this is great. You know, I had a great time. And so when I left there, that was the first school I visited. And I say, man, I'm going to come here, but don't tell anybody because I want to take my other visit. And they were like, yeah, right, you're going to come here. And
what other ones do you visit?
I visited Hawaii, Kansas State, Western Kentucky, Purdue, and University of Cincinnati.
But Texas was from the beginning where you had
That was
planned
the first
on going?
school I visited. I had such a good time. I said, I'm going to school here. Because one of the things growing up in Cincinnati, I wanted to get away from the cold weather. And that was one of my goals in life. I wanted to grow up. I didn't want to cut grass, shovel snow, or rake leaves. That was a goal of mine. I said, when I get an adult, I'm never doing this stuff again. And so, you know, I chose. And then I liked Abe Lemons a lot. And he told me, he said, I'm telling you now, if you come here, you're going to start. He said, no.
Was it true?
Yeah, I started every game. Well, I went 3 years, and I went pro after my junior year. But
so how, once you got to Texas, how was it? Was it easy transition because of the team and all that, or?
Well, the first thing I know, when I was there hanging out with all the guys on the team, I think I saw the same people all weekend because when I got there, University of Texas had 47,000 students then, 2,000 black. And I lived in at that time, I don't know if they still are, I lived in the biggest dorm in the world. There were 10,000 students in our dorm. Wow. So I get there, and it's, you know, college atmosphere. And Abe, one good thing about Abe, I call it a good thing, he didn't really put a lot of restrictions on us. He would tell us, look, we playing at 7:30, be ready to play. We never had curfews. When we went on the road around Texas, he would just rent cars. If we had to fly somewhere, we fly. But we never called a bus. We always had rental cars. And like I remember one year we went and played Harvard. We had a bus then. But most of the time when we went on the road, he would rent cars for us so we could go drive and get our own food. They just give us per diem. Oh. And so, you know, they gave us a lot of freedom. I didn't realize until I got to the pros, most college guys don't have that kind of freedom. And, you know, I think we handled it pretty well.
My daughter doesn't have that freedom today at her college.
No, they really restrict stuff now. But we never got in trouble. A couple times we got speeding tickets because we were flying down the highway. But we never, you know, back then, I don't know, we had a good team, good group of guys. We didn't do crazy stuff.
So that transition from, you know, whole life living with family to now a new family, was that okay because of the team atmosphere, or? The way our dorm, so our dorm, they had these two, like, 13-story towers. Then they had one that was the athletic wing. All the baseball, football, and basketball players lived there. And the way it was, you had your own room. Like, if we were roommates, you had a room and I had a room, and we shared. There was a bathroom between us we shared. So we had our own room. And I remember when I first got there, I got really, really homesick. And so the weekend before we started, you know, you start practice October 15th. I think the weekend before we started practice, they sent me home for the weekend. They flew you home, I assume?
Yeah. 17-hour drive, so they flew me home. And I went home, went to a high school game. And then after, I was all right after that, after I came back. But I was ready to transfer. And they sent me home for the weekend. And when I came back, I was okay. And so I went through my whole college career like that.
And so in college, you left early, right?
Yeah, I left after my junior year and went pro. And that was.
So what was that decision like to decide to leave college and go pro?
Well, you know, I made all-conference, and that year, my junior year, I led the nation in rebounding. And so I was going to be a hot draft pick.
You had the record for the school, too.
Yeah,
right,
well,
when you left?
Yeah, at that time, yeah. I think somebody broke it since then. But so I remember I went and met with my coach on a Monday, and he, you know, I was going to talk to him about whether I should go pro or not. And he said, he talked to this guy, the top NBA scout at the time, name was Marty Blake. And he said, I talked to Marty Blake about you, and he said, you know, I'm going to tell you now, if you go, you're going to be a top 10 pick, but you're not ready. And I said, well, what do you mean? Because you said you just need some more seasoning. And I'm thinking to myself, well, top 10 pick is pretty good, but if I come back to school, you know, maybe I can move up from that. And so I was ready to come back to school. So that was on a Monday. On Wednesday, they fired him as a coach. Oh. And that was really the reason I went pro, because he wasn't going to be there. And then they wanted.
It's unknown of how this
Well, no, they
coach
hired a guy, but he was a complete opposite. Abe was, I forgot his name, but he was.
So that was your final decision.
Well, this guy, he was a Bobby Knight clone, was very controlled. And I used to talk to my buddies after I left. They told me, they said, man, we so glad you left. This is hell.
No more on your own with rental cars and all that.
He actually ran everybody off because the next year, I think they kept my roommate, who was a senior, and one other guy, but everybody else, they ran them off. You know, I mean, they do
didn't
stuff.
have the transfer portal back then.
No, you had to sit out a year if you transferred, but he got rid of all of them.
And I think, is Texas where you earned the nickname Tank?
Yeah. So
I watched you play. So yeah. I think I know why you were nicknamed Tank, but talk about how you got that
nickname. The guys on the team, a guy named Bob Hughes Jr., his father was the winningest high school coach in Texas history, Hall of Fame coach. So he invented it, and Bob Hughes, very funny guy, but we were playing this team, and they had put this guy in. I don't forget what team it was. The guy was trying to rough everybody up. And I said, don't worry, I'll handle it. So the guy tried to take the charge from him. I ran over him, stepped on his face and all that. So after they said, man, you look like a tank running over that guy. So Bob Hughes said, that's what we're going to call you, Tank Thompson, the Destroyer. So and that had a nice ring to it, that it became my name. Now, when I got in the NBA, I ended up being the number 5 pick that year after I went out. So Kansas City drafted me, and I remember Cotton Fitzsimmons.
So much for the warm weather, right?
Well, I thought Dallas was going to draft me, but they didn't. They bypassed me, so Kansas City grabbed me. And Cotton Fitzsimmons was my first coach. And I remember, so the way NBA teams were then, you flew commercial. And so, most commercial planes, they have 12 first-class seats. And NBA rosters were 12 guys, but the way it would work is the 11 guys were seniority. So one of the rookies, me, always had to ride and coach. And then it would be 11 players in the head coach.
One of the biggest dudes on the team.
Yeah, but I could squeeze in the coach. So I remember Cotton came and asked me, what's your nickname? I said, I don't have a nickname, right? Because I didn't want to tell him about Tank. And he said, well, you got to have a nickname. We're going to give you one. So I wanted to see what they came up with. And so, because I went to Texas for 3 years, I had a little twang. I still got a little bit of it. I said I had a little country twang in my voice. So he said, we're going to call you Jethro. I said, whoa. Hold on. Sound like that. I said, my nickname is Tank. And he said, that got a nice ring to it. So they started calling me Tank, and then it just stuck after that. Yeah, I could have been, but I was like, no. I don't want to be that. So I became Tank Thompson. That's where the name came from.
Near the end of my high school years, for the first time ever, I've lived in Sacramento my whole life, and we never had professional teams.
Yeah.
Our college teams were not big deals like they are in other parts of the country. We're often referred to as a cow town or sleepy town, and then
they were still calling that when we first got here.
They still have cowbells today, right? Yeah. Much larger today than it was when I was younger, but. And then we hear that we're going to get a professional basketball team. Yeah. So you had already been on the Kansas City Kings
for 3 years,
for a couple years. Yeah. So, what were your thoughts when you first learned that you were moving from same team but moving from Kansas City to Sacramento?
So nobody on the team had ever been to Sacramento. The only cat that knew anything about Sacramento was Reggie Theus. I remember Reggie Theus said, "Sacramento's not in California." He's from LA.
Beaches and all that, yeah.
We were. So wait, I want to back up a little bit. So when when they first bought the team, they said, no, we're not going to move the team. But then, like halfway through that last year there, they made this announcement that if the team averages 10,000 fans a game, we won't move it. We'll keep them here. I remember Eddie Johnson, whose locker was right next to mine, who I'm still close to. Eddie did some calculations. He said, if we sell out every game the rest of the year, we still won't average 10,000. So we knew we were moving. So, when it got to be April, which we had 10 or 12 games left in the year, they brought the whole team here. We had like 4 days off between the game. So they brought the team here, and we practiced out at American River College. Okay. And dude, it was like, before we came here, the stars in town were like the anchormen, the anchor people from the news station. Yep. So it was like, we were like rock stars. And it was, we were like, we were just regular guys in Kansas City. Everybody went crazy for us. And we were like, and in April, it's already hot here. I was like, dude, I'm ready to move. It's already 80 degrees outside. So we knew we were moving. And that's why as soon as the season ended, I used to go back home to Cincinnati or something. As soon as the season ended, our last game was on, say, Saturday. On, like, Tuesday, I moved here. And I came right away. And, I looked around. I found a house in Citrus Heights, and then since I was the guy that knew the way around town, when Eddie and Woody and some of the other guys came, they moved into my same neighborhood. So I lived in a cul-de-sac. Eddie Johnson lived on the corner. Mike Woodson lived on the next corner, and then Larry Drew lived like 4 doors down from him. So we all, cool. Pretty close to each other. So it was when we first came here. There was nothing here. There was nothing north of I-80. I remember we go to practice every day. They just had that one street.
Del Paso Road.
No.
Or Main.
Del Paso Road wasn't there.
Yeah, it was Main Avenue.
But they had Northgate, and you came off of North Market Street.
Yes.
North Market.
Yep.
You came down that way to get, it was the only street. You came down there to get to and I remember regularly, maybe once or twice a week, you'd be coming to a leaving practice, and you had to stop because there were herds of sheep. They came across the road. I mean, really herds of sheep with the little collies running around, keeping them together. You just have to stop and wait for the herds of sheep to go by, and then you either went to practice or you went home. That's how small Sacramento was. And the arena sag, they got all that stuff built up. There was no Truxell Avenue, none of that Target, Walmart, none of that stuff was there. There was just this building where the arena was, and there was nothing there. It just sat in the middle of a field by itself, and there was a street that went to it and a parking lot around it. That was it.
And nobody would ever imagine what there is today.
Yeah,
at the
all that stuff
Center
now.
Downtown.
Yep.
K Street Mall didn't even look the way it looks now.
Yep.
So I know you had a kind of a historical story of what led up to the Kings coming here. That I, living here my whole life, I actually didn't. I knew later they tried to get the Raiders, but I didn't realize that there was earlier attempts to get football or baseball here in Sacramento.
We knew they had tried to before, and even when we first got here, they were still trying to get. That's why I know the A's wouldn't move it. They were trying to get the A's to move here. They wanted to build a baseball stadium, and they didn't have enough money to buy a team. They wanted a team to move here because if they had the money, they probably would have bought a team, and it would have been successful. You see how good the River Cats do. So I learned this about maybe 7, 8 years ago, and I went over Bob Cook's house one night, and he told me this whole story about how the team came to be here. And he said at the time, he said they first went after the Raiders, and this stuff would, and maybe it is in a book somewhere, I don't know, but they first went after the Raiders because the Raiders were in L.A. and they were talking about leaving. So they said, they met with them and met with Al Davis, and they said, tried to talk them into coming, and they were going to come. They were going to move the team here. And Bob said when they gave him the contract, it was thick, like thick as a phone book. And he said he started looking through it, and he said he called Greg Lukenbill and said, Greg, I'm looking through this contract. I'm on page 9, and we've given up everything except our firstborn. So they said, okay, we can't get the Raiders. It's going to cost us too much. And so they went after the A's, and the A's just wouldn't move because, matter of fact, if it hadn't been for the A's, we probably would have never ended up here.
Because they would have got the A's.
They would have gotten the A's, and then that would have led to, they wanted to rezone all that land north of I-80, all that farmland. And they bought up thousands and thousands of acres, probably cheap. And they wanted to rezone it for development, and the city wouldn't do it. But so they said, we get a pro team here, we'll be able to rezone it. So that's when they ended up, they got a team. And when we first came here, they didn't have approval from the NBA to move here. So they said, okay, the NBA was like, okay, well, if we let you move, where you going to play at? Because we couldn't play at Cosumnes or American River. They said, we got to build an arena. So they didn't have approval to move yet, so they said, we got to build an arena. So when they first built the arena, they built a warehouse, and they got a permit for a warehouse. Remember, the city hadn't rezoned any of their land. They got an approval to build a warehouse, and they wouldn't let anybody inside of it. And so when I first moved here, I saw the inside of it, and it was just a shell, but they wouldn't
it's an office building now.
Yeah, but around, so and they made it that way so they could convert it later because they knew they were going to build a big arena. So they wouldn't let anybody inside. And then when the league approved the move, and they said, where you guys going to play at? And they probably told the league, look, we got a place, just keep it on the low.
Right.
And so when they said, okay, here's where we're going to play. And they started giving tours. And then another thing about the arena, I think Sacramento, you have these naming rights for arenas and stadiums now. Sacramento invented that.
Oh, really?
Arco Arena, they sold the naming rights to Arco.
That was the first one?
That was the first one. And I remember, if you go back and look, when we first moved here, neither one of the newspapers, the Sacramento Bee or the Sacramento Union, they wouldn't call it Arco Arena. They would call it Kings Arena. Mm-hmm. And so they were like, no, we're not, you guys are getting paid for that. We're not doing that. And so they would never call it Arco Arena. And finally, eventually it changed, and everybody started selling their
Now
naming
everybody
rights.
still
there.
calls
Yeah.
it Arco Arena, even though it's had
Yeah.
like 3 or 4 different names.
Yep. Well, when we moved to the bigger building, it was still Arco Arena. And then
Right.
later on, that
Power or
contract
something.
expired, and they sold it to somebody else, and then
And
they
we
sold
still
it to
call it
Sleep
Arco.
Train. Yeah.
So
Yep.
you mentioned how you guys were kind of like rock stars when you moved here because Sacramento really had no
Yeah.
professional anything.
Mm-hmm.
But talk a little bit about how it was once you got here and you guys were playing, because you guys were decent when you
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
came with Reggie Theus and Larry Drew, all those
Yeah.
all
We had
those
Mike
people
Winston.
when the
We had-
colors were light blue and red and
Yeah, we had a
the-
decent team.
the historic jersey. So
And,
what was it like playing back then in a city that had never had a professional sport before?
You know, it was then the way the playoffs, the way you saw the playoffs this past year. That's how it was every game. It was an event, and because there wasn't a lot to do here, so every game was an event. They sold out every game. And I want to say they started selling standing room tickets, I think. But it was just, every game was an event, and we were kind of middle of the road. I actually think we ended up the season like 41-41. Maybe we won 45 games, but we just made the playoffs. Got pounded by Houston in the first round, but Houston went to the finals that year. That's when they had Ralph Sampson and Olajuwon, and they went to the finals. And they lost to Boston in the finals. And but every game was an event.
So back then, I think back then centers and the big forwards were a little different than it is today.
Well,
right? The centers were.
Yeah, well, then you had a post-up game.
Yeah.
And I remember Otis Thorpe was a better post-up player than me. And so they had drafted him. That was his second year in the league. And he's a pretty good post-up player, and they had me. And then that first year here, we drafted Joe Klein. And Joe and I were just, on any other team, Joe and I would both be backup centers. So one of us had to start. And I kind of alternated a lot. Sometimes I started. If I went in the slump, Joe would start. I never really cared because we both played about 20-some minutes a game. So I figured I'm playing the same amount. I didn't care about starting. But I just wanted to win. And so we were okay. And then that second year, we fell off. And the third year, we fell off. And I think the fourth year, I got traded. But we just, honestly, we were okay. We never could get over the hump. We just weren't a very good team. And they didn't have an incentive to make the team better because we sold out every game.
Right. Well, I think there were some records back then of number of sellouts.
Probably, yeah. We had like an 8-year sellout or something. But I remember Joe Axelson ran the team. And Joe was not, he was a basketball guy, meaning he knew how to run a team and stuff. But he was not. I'm going to tell you this. One of the secrets of the NBA is there's really only about 5 or 6 owners that try to win a championship every year. The rest of them are in it for the money. And you can figure out who they are.
Right.
Of course, the Lakers, Celtics, I ain't going to name them all. But there's really only about 5 or 6 teams. And there might be a couple more now. But back then, there were only about 5 teams that really tried to win a championship, tried to put a team together. And Joe's thing was, well, why should we spend money to make the team better? We're going to sell out every game. So they were just like, go with what we got. And so that's why we were the way we were.
So back then, who was your, at the big man spots, who did you feel was the best that you went against?
The best player then was Kareem.
Kareem. Okay, so I grew up.
I'm gonna tell you a funny.
My guy growing up.
Tell you a funny story about Kareem. So I came in the league, and back then the game was a lot more physical, and I was a physical player. And after I started my career, I tried to figure out. Like I was telling you this over breakfast, I would use physicality as a defensive tactic, and I try to figure out who didn't like contact and who didn't. If you didn't like contact, I was hitting you as soon as they threw the ball up. Yeah, I was going to beat you up the whole game. Legally, but I was going to beat you up the whole game. And so I remember Cotton, we played the Lakers once. I think we played them in the exhibition season, but then we played them in the regular season. Cotton said, look, against this guy, you're going to let sleeping dogs lie. And I was like, sleeping dogs lie?
Talking about Kareem.
Yeah, I said, I don't know what the hell is that. I never heard of that. What is sleeping dogs like? He said, look, you're going to play him straight up. He said, he going to get about 25 or 30. Don't worry about it. Let him get his 25 or 30. We're going to try to stop the other guy. And I said, well, why would I let him get 25 or 30? He said, I'm telling you, he said, Tank, you like to beat up guys? He said, and Kareem was a finesse player. He wasn't a physical player.
Right.
But he said, you start hitting this guy, he said he liable to score 60. Just let him get his 25 or 30, and we'll try to shut the rest of the guys down. Okay. I was like, okay. And so that's the way we played him. He got his 25 or 30.
Didn't get his 60?
No, he never. Well, one time he did go off. When Kareem became the all-time leading scorer, the game when he became an all-time leading scorer, they were playing Utah and Vegas. Utah played a lot of their games in Vegas when they first came in the league. And so they played in Vegas that game, and we were playing them the next night in L.A. So when they came that night before the game, he had broken the record, and they had a ceremony before the game. And the team gave him a new Mercedes, and they gave him like this $100,000 built-in stereo system for his house. And that's the only time I met Will Chamberlain. He was there, and, you know, I was in awe of him and shook his hand. So they had this great ceremony for him. So the game starts, and Magic must have told him, yo, big fella, this is your game, so we're going to try to score as many as you can.
You.
At halftime, he had 32. So we came out the second half, and he scored. I think he scored once, and then so he had 34 with like 11 minutes left in the third quarter. And going for a rebound, Mark Oberding elbowed him in the head, and he had one of his famous migraines, and he didn't play the rest of the night. They still beat us by like 20 or 30, but he didn't play the rest of the night. And I was like, yo, that would have been the night he scored 60 on me because I couldn't stop him. You know?
So, you know, Kareem was one of the people, or was my favorite basketball player.
He's one of my favorites, too. He's one of my idols.
I get books. The only time I read a book was about Kareem or the Raiders, Jack Tatum or somebody. What made it, so as somebody that played against him, what made him so good?
Well, I remember he's very graceful. And he was, you know, he's 7'2", but he was long, like had long arms. And his footwork was impeccable. And Kareem had two moves. He knew how to post up. And a lot of these guys now don't know how to post up. He knew how to come down. And I learned actually how to post up watching him because he wouldn't, like a lot of guys now, they just go down there and get on the block and post up. And now you can fight them off. You put that forearm in their back, you can push them off. He would wait until they brought the ball around to that wing, and then he would post up. And once it's a guy on the wing and you post up, so you can't push him off the block then. And he would post up, and they would give it to him. And, you know, 7'2", he would look around, you know, get their cutters, see if they're going to double team. Because if they double teamed him, you know, he was so long, he would hit the cutters. And so I'm only guarding him one-on-one. We always guard him one-on-one. And he had that sky hook. And people say, well, why do you get you know, you can't really stop. The only way to stop that sky hook was to get so far up on his left shoulder that he couldn't go that way. But then he's 7'2". His drop step was so good. He would drop step
at the rim.
And he would be, you know, inch from the rim and just lay it in. I'm like, well, I got a better shot at trying to bump him on the hook and make him miss that. And so that's one of the reasons he was so good. But he was just fundamentally sound. You know, people forget when Kareem was in college, they outlawed dunking. Right. That's how good he was. A lot of people forget. They outlawed dunking. I remember I was in junior high because when he graduated from college, they put dunking back in. Right. And I remember when I was in the 9th grade, we were all excited because they put dunking like we were going to dunk the ball. They put dunking back in, and so, you know, that's why he was so good.
So it sounds like somebody that had immense talent but also worked hard at his craft.
Yeah, and he and I think playing for John Wooden was always fundamentally sound. Right. You know, those cats were always well taught. But he was an idol for a lot of us younger guys because, you know, he's a very proud man. He was a guy he never did anything embarrassing.
Right. And very involved in the civil rights movement.
Yeah,
and all
he was
that.
involved in all that. So he was a guy you looked up to. And I remember when this is like my first week in the league when we played them in St. Louis in the exhibition games. I remember both teams were staying at the same hotel. And I remember I got to have brunch or lunch with him one day. And I'm sitting there the whole time just like in awe of him because I'm like, this is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right? And then him, I was like, yeah, James Worthy, yeah. You got drafted the same year as me. You're another rookie. But Kareem, I was just asking him all kind of questions. He probably like, all right, kid, you're getting on my nerves. Okay, shut it up. When I got in the league, I was the youngest guy in the league because they didn't have guys out of high school then. Clark Kellogg was 2 months younger than me, so I was one of the youngest guys in the league, and I was kind of immature. Mm-hmm. Even though I was 21, I probably acted like I was 17. But, you know, and a lot of that stuff, I was just like, you know, eyes wide open, just in awe, a lot of the stuff I saw.
So then you get traded to the Pacers, I think, right?
Yeah, my 4th year here.
What was that a surprise to you? Was that just part of business to you?
Well, it was the first time I ever been traded, so it was a surprise. And I remember I was hurt that they traded me, and I didn't want to go. Believe it or not, I remember we had a bad team. But when I got traded there, I got traded February 19th. They had 11 wins. That's how bad. Their record was like 11-40 or something like that. Like that, how they trade me to an even worse team? So I got there. But we played 500 the rest of the year, and then every year after that, we made the playoffs. So, yeah, we did good. So it ended up being a good move. And Indiana had a much better organization because they actually were trying to build a winner. They had one of the probably the best GMs ever in Donnie Walsh. One of the best people, like one of the best people I've ever known. And it was a good organization. They had a good structured organization.
So one of the things, eventually you get into coaching after your playing career's done. And for two people that you already knew.
So
I don't know the whole story, but I'm guessing because one of the things I talk about a lot is, when young kids, especially in neighborhoods like probably that you grew up in, neighborhoods that I grew up in, a lot of times don't want help and don't want to take, mentorship. And one of the things I tell them all the time is nobody is successble by themselves. The most successful people you see, whether white, black, or anything else, didn't get there on their own. Somebody's helped them along the way. And as I look at your history, I think, I don't know, that's why I'm asking, that might have been part of you becoming a coach, because both people for the Knicks and the Charlotte Bobcats that you coached were people you had already known. Well, so talk about how that came about.
Even before that, when I was in high school, since the University of Cincinnati was recruiting me so hard, Oscar Robertson lived in Cincinnati. I remember he used to come over to our high school and play ball with us. Now, Oscar was 45 years old. He would destroy us every day. We'd take a bunch of the JV team, JV guys, and they'd be our starting five from the varsity. They would destroy us. And he wouldn't score a bucket. He just run stuff and pass. And he was the guy that first worked with me and showed me some simple things that nobody else had ever shown me. But he started working with me, and he told me, he said, you take these things and you pass them on to somebody else. So I've always had a sense of giving back to others. I grew up poor too, so just giving back to others. So when I first moved here, and remember when I first came here, I was the only guy here. In Kansas City, I did it some, but that was all of us. But when I first got here, I was the only guy here, and the team got dozens and dozens of requests. And every day they would send me out to do something, make an appearance or go here, go there. And it was in the summer. I wasn't doing anything, but I go work out in the morning. So I did all that stuff. And I just have always had a sense of, giving back to others, because there were people that did stuff for me growing up. And, you hear people talk about pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and I did this. Nobody's ever, you see these guys that made all this money, like Jeff Bezos. He created Amazon, but when he first had the idea of Amazon, his parents gave him $350,000 to start it. So
everybody has help.
Everybody had help. It could have been from your family, it could have been your mom and dad, but everybody had some help. And you can go tell kids, hard work pays off, which it does. But I always make sure when I go talk to kids, I emphasize to them, nobody does any of this stuff by themselves. So don't get discouraged because, you're trying to do this stuff by yourself, and it's hard because you need to accept help from people. And there are people, there's one good thing about America, there are people that will help you.
Right.
And it doesn't matter about political affiliation or one-on-one. There are people that will help you, do things or be better. And I just always try to do that. And I always tell kids, pass it on. If I help you, you go help somebody else.
And I'm assuming that played a role in getting these positions, as you used to play for these coaches, and now they're asking you to coach with them, right?
Well, they didn't ask me. I asked them. So I played for Larry Brown my last,
But I'm guessing
years.
if you didn't have that relationship, the answer might have been no.
Yeah, it would have been. So I had, I called Larry and said, I want to get into coaching. This is like 10, 11 years after I quit playing. And Larry said, I remember Larry said, just hold on, I'm working on something. He hadn't been hired in Charlotte yet, and he didn't want to let it be known yet. Okay. So he said, I remember he told me, he said, call me next Monday. It's okay. So I called him next Monday. He had gotten hired, and he said, look, he said, do you care what your title is? And I said, no, I don't care. So he actually hired me as a strength coach, but all my work was assistant coaching work. And then after I was there a couple months, they hired another strength coach and moved me over to assistant coach.
Brown is a legendary coach.
Larry is a legend. I learned so much from him. And see, Woody, who I who I coached under, who was a teammate of mine,
Right.
but I coached under him in New York. He also coached under Larry. He probably, now that I think about it, he probably told Larry, yeah, he's a good guy, hire him. And I learned a lot from Larry.
Again, another relationship.
Yeah. A lot of getting in the NBA coaching, a lot of it is relationships, because the coach wants to hire guys that he knows and he can depend on, and there won't be a bunch of messiness or, this isn't my guy, so I don't know. I'm sure as a police chief, you want guys that you know them, you know what they're going to do,
Yep.
you know their reputation, and so it's the same way. And so this reminds me of something. Mike Brown, who's the Kings coach, he was, my last year in the league when I played in Denver, it was his first year in the league, and he was our scout, and I got to know him through that. And Mike, he was a good guy. And I wonder what he was just a scout. They sent him all these CBA teams to go watch him play. But he was always very friendly, very knowledgeable. And we would always talk. And I always rooted for him to do well. And he did,
He's doing good.
He's doing
now.
well now. So
doing great
I'm
now.
happy for him.
So, what would you tell, there's a lot of kids coming up now and for a long time now that have dreams of doing what you did for a living, right? Being a professional athlete in whatever sport, football, basketball. But there's also parents, as my wife and I, as parents of two athletes, I've seen some crazy stuff at the field or at the track from parents that, I don't know if their whole hopes and dreams are dependent on their kid, but
you're calling it right.
It can get crazy at
live
times.
vicariously through
And
their kids.
we always looked at it that, hey, if you play, you're going to college no matter what. So if you play sports on top, that's a cherry on top. But we never really, I always wanted them to have fun at what they do.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, both for an athlete and maybe even the parents, from a professional athlete, which is probably just a minuscule percentage of the population that has the ability, drive, and all the things to be able to reach that level. What advice would you give a young athlete or even their parents today that have dreams of that?
I would tell a kid, one of the things you don't see enough of when they interview guys is the work they put in, the tremendous amount of work they put in. So I tell kids, just if you really want to do this, you got a heart for it. Whatever sport it is, football, baseball, tennis, whatever, play as much as you can. And one of the great things about basketball is you don't really need anybody else to get better. All you need is a basketball and a hoop. You can look up stuff online about dribbling drills and shooting drills, but you can do dribbling drills by yourself and shoot by yourself. Football, you need somebody to throw the ball to you. Right. Baseball, you need somebody to throw it back and forth. But basketball, you can do it by yourself. So I just tell guys, play as much as you can, whether in your driveway or if you know where a gym is. And I tell them the one and two things to work on your ball handling and work on your dribbling. Because when I came up, if you were a tall guy, you played center. Mm-hmm. But now, really, really now with basketball, if you can guard that opposing guy, you can almost play any position. Right. Point guards are always point guards because they see the court well, but it doesn't matter. Magic kind of opened that up as a 6'9" point guard. But if you can, like Wembanyama plays for San Antonio, he really is a three-man. Even though he's 7'4", he's a three-man. Right. And all that matters is, can you guard the other three-man? If you can guard him, then you can play three. He can shoot the ball. He can handle. They don't need and he's actually too thin to put on the blocks yet, but he can guard just about anybody out there.
He'll be putting on some weight.
Yeah, he's going to put on some weight. He's only 19, so he's going to put on some weight.
One of your titles, I guess I could say, is dad and father. So what advice would you give to the parents out there that be hollering and screaming
so with the parents,
getting mad at the coaches and referees?
I would just tell parents, support your kids as much as you can and encourage them as much as you can. And, kids aren't always going to have great games, but I coached a 9-year-old team once. Now, I was dating this woman in L.A. and her daughter played, and she asked me to help with the team. So I went to the practice, and it was at this, they're 9 years old. So it was at this rec center, and I'm watching them play. I said, okay, you know what? I'll coach the team, and you can just learn from me. And all I did was, they're 9 years old. Most kids at 9 years old, they're not even going to remember whether they won games or not. They're just going to remember they had fun playing. Right. So I tried to just make them have fun. And so I did all kind of drills where they go against each other, dribbling drills, passing drills, shooting drills. I just made them go against each other. And then the game, at that age, all of them going to chase the ball around. Yeah. They just, whoever's got the one, I was just trying to teach them, spread out so somebody can throw you the ball. And I remember I started coaching. I think we won one game, but in that league, in that rec league we were playing, and all the teams went to the playoffs. So after 2 games, I'm looking at the parents in the stand. I'm like, yo, these cats are crazy. And they were, the guys refereeing the games are the teenagers that work at the rec league.
Right, and they're yelling at them.
Oh, they're yelling at them, accusing them of cheating. So after the second game, I said, okay, hold on. I want to talk to all the parents. Y'all girls go over there and shoot the ball. And I took them all in the corner. I said, look, encourage them, support them. I said, don't point fingers at anybody. I said, what do you think? You think these rec kids got money on the game? Why would they point you? Why would you think they got it in for your daughter? Right, they don't care. Right. I said, they're not really referees, so they're going to miss calls and not do a great job, but who cares? I said, y'all see y'all kids traveling, they run with the ball, and they got to actually pick and choose what they call, because there's 15 calls every game, every play. So I said, look, if y'all can't just support your kids and encourage them, don't bring your girls back. But they all kept coming back, and I didn't really have a problem with anybody after that, but I would just tell a parent, just support your kids and encourage them. I said, even if they didn't play well, encourage them to keep coming back. I said, if they put in the work, they'll be good. Yeah.
So I have to ask this question because I've been called a homer in Sacramento because, I've lived here my whole life. I have no intention of leaving. So as somebody that has lived in New York and all these other places from Cincinnati, you still, to this day, call Sacramento home.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, number one, because my mother lives here. She moved out here when I was playing for the Kings.
That's a good reason.
And I just always go where my mama is. But, but I like this city. The weather's great. Not today, but, even the winters are mild here. It's 50 degrees.
Well, compared to Cincinnati.
No, we get in the middle of winter. I call my friends in Cincinnati, be like, yeah, it was 50 degrees today. And back there it's like 10 below zero. Right. And they'd be like, F you.
Yeah, exactly.
Anytime we have a good winter day, I call back home and mess with them. But the people here are great. They're nice. It's starting to get it still is a small town and has a small town feel. People are friendly and nice. Most of the places you go, people are going to be friendly. Nobody's really, nasty or standoffish. So they got good people, and I'm sure you know that from being the police chief. Yeah. They got good people here, and that's one of the things I like about it. You don't really have bad
we're glad
traffic.
You decided to stay.
I'm glad to be here, man. Here. So I like it here.
So one of the last things I want to ask you is, as you surely saw and probably experienced to some extent, Sacramento wasn't terribly different than the rest of the country over the last several years, where there's social justice protests and unrest, and other cities obviously had it in some cases a lot worse than we did. But we weren't spared. The only time an NBA game has ever been blocked in the history of the NBA happened twice here in Sacramento, the freeway block.
Oh, yeah.
So as somebody that's been around to different places and experienced so many different things as yourself, what do you hope that we as a society are talking about, thinking about, doing as we move forward to tomorrow and the next day to make life better for all people, to where there's not such frustration, whether it be law enforcement or government in general or jobs or housing, the housing you grew up in? What do you think we need to be talking about and thinking about and doing?
Well, I think the country's changed a lot to how it was, 30, 40 years ago. But I think one of the things that makes America great is people look out for each other. And, there's so much separation now, and people look on each other with suspicion. I remember, you say you Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever you are, but it used to not be like that where they were so staunchly opposed to each other. It would be like if you were a Democrat and I'm a Republican, I would hear what you got to say, and we may not agree. I always think you're trying to talk me over to your side, and so I would listen to you, and I try to talk you over to my side. And now it's just like, whatever you say, I don't want to hear it. So I think that's bad. But we need to get to a point where we listen to each other, and, it always ends up better. Because really, I always think for, on my level, on our level where we are, it doesn't matter whether the president's a Democrat or Republican. Most of what they do is stuff going to affect society, but down on the level where we are, it's not going to affect us much. Right. Economy might be a little better, it might be a little worse. Taxes might go a little high, a little low, but we're going to live our life. And I think, like I say, one of the great things about America is people are willing to help each other. And I think we need to be more like that and get back to that. And also, I want to say something about you. So, yeah, I've lived somewhere everywhere, man. And I've seen some bad police, and you had these problems with people being against police. But here, I always thought this is one of the that when I saw people protesting, I said, okay, I guarantee those people never been out of Sacramento. They haven't been other places. I was like, dude, you don't know how bad it is some other place. Because the police here are great. I've become friendly with some. I know some, and I've never thought the police here were bad.
That's awesome to hear.
So, yeah, it's good here.
And now you have ventured out into affordable housing and things. Why is that now an interest of yours of creating affordable housing?
That's part of my give back. And I would like to, what I'd like to do is be able to get into that and create a legacy. But there, and especially here in Sacramento, the housing has gotten so expensive. Yeah. And they have a severe shortage of housing here. And that's one of the reasons it's gotten so expensive, because they don't have enough housing. And it's gotten so expensive to build. It ends up being, it's a problem. And I'm trying to get into that field, me and my partner, but we want to get into building some affordable housing. And, that's part of our give back, make it easier for somebody else. Because, I grew up in the projects initially, and now I moved to a neighborhood. But I've seen, people that came from that background. And like I say, if you can help somebody else, it just ends up making life better for all of us.
And if somebody listening to this, and your story, which is a pretty unique story, especially to Sacramento, right, as a trailblazer for what now we're kind of used to, this Golden One Center, great concerts and Kings. But the Kings started all that in a little building that you talked about in North Natomas. And you were part of that group that came and did community outreach and really created something we had never even seen before, because we never had a professional team. So if somebody hears all that and hears the work you're trying to do now with affordable housing and give back, is there a way that they could help you or get in contact with you, or if somebody listening to this is inspired by your story, how can they help with what your vision is for giving back?
I would tell them, I would just tell people, look around you and reach out to somebody, because there probably is somebody that needs help or that could use a hand that, you can help make their life better. I mean, for me personally, selfishly, I would say, okay, if we could find somebody with some money to help us do a project with, because the government has lots of money available for affordable housing, but, there's some hoops you got to jump through to get into it. But, but I would tell somebody, if you want to get into it, start investigating. There's opportunities out there, and there's people around you. You may not know it, but there's somebody around you that needs help. So take a look around and reach out to them.
More collaboration is what you're saying.
There you go. More collaboration.
Less division and more collaboration.
Yeah, that's a good term.
I love it.
More collaboration.
Well, hey, I really want to thank you as one of the original Kings of Sacramento, who decided to stay here and make Sacramento their home. I appreciate all that you've done for the city and for the Kings and for the community as a whole, and appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here, Daniel. I appreciate it.
One of the big purposes of A Way Forward is to hear different voices and different opinions, because that is how we can make informed decisions ourselves. So if you are someone that would like to come on A Way Forward to express your opinion, go to chiefhahn.com/podcast. Chief, HAHN.com/podcast.